This is the highlight of our year. This is what we live for as commissioners, to have our city auditor, Sharon Erickson, here with us. We have a private audience with her to run through our key questions and concerns as they relate to the city. This is really the source of truth for those new commissioners. When I first joined the commission, Gary Cunningham, I sat next to him my first night, and he was so jazzed because Sharon was here. And he's such a stoic fellow, and he's grinning.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what's happening to me? Like, what's going on here? I'm in the right place to get excited about auditors.
Statistics was my worst class. That was my roadblock getting my degree.
So without further ado, again, you've got a hard copy, and Sharon will start us with the areas that relate to our scope, which is transportation, public safety, code enforcement. We'll have limited time to ask questions. Let's say you speak for 40 minutes, and then we'll have 20 minutes of questions. We provided you questions in advance, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, good. So what Sharon's going to be speaking to does meld in a lot of our questions, so if your questions have been answered, hold. Always you can get in touch with Ms. Erickson. We have city email addresses, and she's and her staff are available.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, and please, we look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm not sure what to do with that build-up. But what you have in front of you tonight, I just wanted to spend a couple of seconds talking about it. So it is basically, we were discussing before the meeting, and I've introduced it as an almanac of city services. So I think what's really difficult sometimes in dealing with the city is a lot of people don't know exactly what the city does. And I can tell you, even within my office, there's sometimes confusion about what's a city responsibility, what's a county responsibility, where does the state come in, how do these services interrelate? So what I knew that we could do, and this is the 10th year we've done this report, is put together a report that provided all of you, because it's mostly going to be people who are interested. I call you guys policy geeks. Just because the folks who are deeply interested in city services. Now, what I know is that each one of you will care about a different aspect. So one person may care a lot about street trees, another person may care a lot about police response time. There's no one set of metrics in the city that can tell you everything about every service. But what we've tried to do in this report is put together a compendium of different services that people are asking us about. And then what we've done is we try to give you some perspective on those. So I don't know how many people have seen this presentation before. I did it for the neighborhood, one of the neighborhood groups. But I'm going to run through it pretty briefly. I also ran through this with the city council. So the other thing I wanted to say is that the way this fits together with your charge is this report is for the 10 years basically ended last June. So it's for last fiscal year. So what it's going to do is it will fit together with your upcoming discussion on the budget. So what's really hard when you've got a budget document in front of you, so what's your comment? The city's going to have a budget, they're going to print it on May 1st, it's going to come to you for comment. So, is $50 million for this a good thing, a bad thing? So, the reason I've been bringing this report to you here is this will show you the trend lines over time. So it shows you 10 years worth of spending. So at least you know whether $50 million is better than last year or worse. This report also gives you some indication of service levels so that you know whether or not for that additional $50 million, is it an additional $50 million or is it the same $50 million? Can we expect an increase in service levels or should we expect a decrease? And it's one of those things where you may think it's a good thing, the service level is going up, bad thing, the service level is going down, or vice versa. It may be a service that you're not really fond of, but those are the kinds of things you want to comment about to the city council. So this report is intended to give you some background to do that. Hope that kind of makes sense. Our goal is to let taxpayers know what they're getting for their tax dollar. So I am going to run through the whole report really quickly and then focus in on your areas. And we can always flip back to these. So what this presentation does is it just kind of gives you a snapshot of each chapter in the report. I'm just going to go through the report kind of in basic order. It's an almanac, so my goal is to teach you where to find the information that you want to find later, because you're not all going to agree on what's important. So the very first chapter in the report is the community profile. It's actually a very popular chapter in our report. It is basic statistics, but you can see the changes over time, and you can see what San Jose is. So San Jose is 1 million people. It's the 10th largest city in the country, the 3rd largest city in California. We've got an ethnically diverse population, about 35% Asian, 32% Hispanic, 26% white. Nearly 40% of San Jose residents are foreign-born, and more than half of residents speak a language other than English at home. So this is a statistic I use when we're going in and we're auditing in departments. We're looking at whether or not they're putting out materials in sufficient number of languages to hit the residents who may be interested. Another thing we include in here is that although San Jose's median income is $102,000, it's probably gone up since then. About 17% of our households, this is as of last year, earned less than $35,000. So 17% is a sizable population. The next chapter in our report covers a resident survey. We do this survey every year, so we can compare statistics from year to year. The city has a number of other surveys that they run. This one, to me, is nice because it's consistent. It's the same questions every year. You can see, 58% rated their neighborhood is good or excellent. Now that's a citywide statistic. We don't have the ability to break it down by district or do what some of us would call cross-tabs. We'd have to pay a lot more money to do that, basically. But what we've got is these citywide numbers. So again, we're looking at trends in those graphics up here on the right. You can see we were focused on some of those with the deepest drops in those trends. So for example, down there dead last on the bottom is housing options. You can see it dropping from 50% rating good or excellent, what is that, 6-7 years ago, to I believe it's 20 something, or even lower than that now, like 15-17%. I do have some more statistics here from the resident survey. One thing that I thought would be of interest to this commission is a lot of these numbers have been going down as the city has reduced services, and it's gotten, people are complaining about traffic and congestion and so on. I was fascinated at the bottom right-hand corner, public participation is trending up, which I think is just really fascinating, and it's a good sign of what's going on in our community. Now this is all self-reported, so people tell you what they think you want to hear sometimes. But I think it's good, even if people in our community just think they're supposed to participate more, that's also a good thing. So I'm going to look that gift horse in the mouth. The next section is on financial condition. One of the things this shows you is that as in terms of revenue per capita, so that's total revenue per capita, so divided by 1 million people, we're way down there, bottom left-hand corner, we're way down there just above Fresno. On the other hand, in expenditures per capita, so we're spending much less than everybody else but Fresno in this graphic. One of the things that worries me, you just heard from your liaison about street condition, capital asset value. So that's the accounting value, so it's kind of a constructed number. But the accounting value of the city's assets, physical assets, we were the only city last year where our capital assets actually decreased in value. So that means for those of you who know anything about depreciation, we're depreciating our assets faster than we're building them. What you want to do is basically you want to be above zero. So if you want to be building a community for your children, you always want to have, you're contributing more than you're using up in the current year. And it's an accounting term, but I think it's pretty useful to talk about our capital assets in San Jose. There is a chapter on, there is a section on overall staffing. You can see in that graphic on the left, the general fund shortfalls. Now, one of the questions that you had was on the shortfalls for this coming year. I have not seen the updated numbers. My understanding is it was looking pretty bad back several months ago, and there were budget reduction targets for departments that were passed out. That's when they thought the budget deficit was going to be more like 30 million. It's down to, their estimate right now is about 7 million. So in the mayor's budget message, he's basically indicating it's going to be tough to balance the budget, but that he felt that with some belt tightening, it should be fine. Now, $7 million is a lot of money when you're talking about being able to use that to provide a community service. On the other hand, keep in mind that the city's budget is $1 billion something. So it's a very narrow margin on $1 billion worth of expenditures. So I do believe the city should be able to balance that budget. The budget will be printed May 1st, and I'm assuming that's when you'll see a copy. We'll all be watching our email boxes to see when it comes out, and then let it crash our computers. You can also see here the number of city employees. So the number of city employees in San Jose is far less than in other jurisdictions. One of the questions that got asked of me, got sent over to me, was what's going on with our staffing? And if you have a hard copy of the report, I wanted to point you to page 38, where you can see here, so authorized staffing, so it's this page. I just didn't have it as part of this presentation. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, it lists every city department, and you can see the 10-year change in the number of staff. So most of them are red. So you can see we now have many fewer staff members in most departments than we had 10 years ago. Some of that was outsourced, but most of it we reduced services. We cut people. We're a service organization, so you cut people, you have less service. I did want to show you, so there is a problem with vacancies in the city. So you can see that on the bottom string of graphics there on page 38, you can see citywide full-time equivalent positions. Full-time equivalents just means the equivalent, so that's the way we equalize for part-time employees. So it just means if we put everybody in a bucket and counted them as full-time. So citywide full-time, you can see where we dropped from 10 years ago, but we've been climbing back up. You can also see in the graphic right next to that, vacant full-time positions as of June 30th. So the city did have, as of June 30th, about 800 vacant positions. So that's, the question was, do we have a hiring problem or a staffing, I think it was a hiring problem or a funding problem? It's a combination of both is the simple answer. So there is a hiring problem. The city is working on that. We've got a new HR director who is addressing those issues and trying to get that number down. So that's one problem. The other problem, of course, is, so we have, that's 800 budgeted positions that were vacant. So those are people where the money was set aside, but they had not been hired. Now, many have since then been hired. June 30 is kind of a weird time of the year to measure, but it was the end of the fiscal year. So you can see where that is going. So those are positions we could fill. Now, there's another probably 1,000 positions that were short of where we were 10 years ago. That's kind of a separate issue. I'm hoping that kind of answered that question. I'm going to keep going, and then you can ask me questions. Of course, We're doing an annual report, so of course we had to cover the flood. We provided basic information on the flood. It really did cause a significant disruption in city operations, far less to those of us in City Hall than to people in those neighborhoods. But it did. Capital budgets got moved around, people were moved around. The Parks Department was basically redeployed for temporarily during the flood. So we did cover that in this report. Then our report just goes through each chapter, is chapter by chapter, each department in alphabetical order. Now it means you kind of got to know which department the service you care about is in. But we tried to make the report colorful, so you'll page through until you find the service you like. It's also online in PDF, so if you can search for street tree, street light, whatever it is you care about, you can find it that way as well. So the first is airport. The airport continues to have financial issues as we get passenger traffic back up. I'm going to kind of skip through some of these, but basically you can see their residents are very happy with the airport. This report again was as of June 30, 2017, so it's 9 months old at this point. Since then, I hope you've been seeing all the new flights that they're adding to San Jose Municipal Airport. Economic development is a chapter in the report. This graphic does show jobs per employed resident. There were some questions that you had about the housing jobs imbalance. What this is showing you is we have about 0.8 jobs for every employed resident. Now, what that means is people are leaving San Jose in order to go to work. So there's only enough jobs here for 80% of employed residents.
Your
The
mic,
others,
your
it
microphone
mic turned
get
off.
cut off.
just went out.
No.
Yeah.
They're all down.
They're all down.
They're all done.
There's
Are they
a,
all out? Okay.
Just sing out.
there's a problem. Keep going.
Okay. So jobs is something, one of you was asking about the jobs housing imbalance and how that affects the city's budget. So it does affect the city's budget. I don't have indications of by how much. I keep wanting to study that, and I've just never gotten around to it. The difference is when you have less business in town, think about it, businesses sell stuff to each other. If you have less business in town, you have less of what we call business-to-business sales tax. You also, businesses are frequently investing big dollars in buildings and equipment. That's property tax comes from that. So it's not that residents don't pay sales tax and property tax and other taxes, but businesses also contribute. So to the extent that we're below, that the common thing is 1-to-1. You want to have enough jobs in your community for the people who want to be employed in your community. Otherwise, you're going to have a huge transportation nightmare. If nothing else, of people moving from place to place. So the goal is to have that many. People will choose to work wherever they choose to work or where they choose to live. But the goal is to be at least 1-to-1. Environmental services basically covers all of the different garbage, sewer, stormwater, Muni Water. We track pretty carefully the annual fees. You can see that in the beginning of the last decade, fees were going up dramatically. You see there the graphic on storm sewer fees, so that's your storm drain fee. They went up dramatically, they've leveled out, and we're seeing that with most fees. The other one that people care about, now Muni Water only covers about 10%, I think it is, of the city. Everybody else is private water companies. Muni Water is still below, is running below what other water bills are going up. But you can see the other San Jose water retailers, that graphic on the bottom right, where you can see the cost of water going up. So we do track those. Those are all ratepayer funded. They don't get general fund money, so they're not using sales tax or property tax. They're funded from your user fees. Fire department is next. So 91,000 emergencies, this is something that people generally care a lot about. We're trying to include more maps in our report. So these are by station areas, so you're going to have to figure out where your district is or what your station is on that. You can see the turnout time. So the goal is to hit 80% of priority 1 calls within 8 minutes. So the priority 1 means lights and sirens. We're down about 71%. Down there on the bottom left, you can see where we're trying to pull apart the different pieces of response time. So again, this fire department. So dispatch time means the amount of time it takes from the time that you place the call, it gets routed to the fire dispatchers over in fire until they get it out to the station. So they're doing that in less than 2 minutes. The turnout time, that's the time, I joke, it takes to get down the fire pole. We don't have fire poles, but that's, I guess we still have at least one.
We do.
Yeah, we do have at least 1 or 2. And then travel time, you can see that where their target was less than 4 minutes, and of course they're only meeting that like 40% of the time. Now, part of that is because San Jose is big and spread out. The other part, of course, is traffic. So there's more information in the report on fire, and I'm happy to talk more about it. Housing, big issue here. Variety of housing options and availability of affordable housing, 6%, 15, people are not very happy with the housing options at this point. The average monthly rents and the median single-family home price, of course, keep going up. Information technology. So this is the customer contact center. So the 535-3500 number that you can call with any kind of question. So they get about 168,000 calls a year. About 18,000 service desk requests go through the IT department. That's the information technology department. You can see their staffing there. So we are understaffed and under-resourced in terms of information technology. Library. Library is back up in the number of hours that are offered, thank goodness, but we still don't have any branch libraries that are open on Sundays. Only Maine is open on Sundays. But the total number of hours open is up. We're now up at 58,000 hours open, so we count those across all branches. Somebody asked where we get the information for our report. So this is coming from the library's systems, and we're counting the number of hours at each branch that they're open when we put together these numbers. Total circulation is going down, but the library is not terribly worried about that because the libraries are jam-packed. So people are using libraries. What we think is, you can see the e-books is on that bottom left-hand corner, you can see where they're a small but growing portion. I think that we're actually probably undercounting e-book usage. The methods for Facebook would know how to count them, but we're not as good at counting the number of e-book usages, but we think that's growing a lot, and people are using the libraries. We also think that people are bringing their own devices into the libraries. So they're bringing their phones, their laptops, their tablets into the libraries and using the Wi-Fi network, and we don't yet have a good way to count all of that either. So that's something we just need to work on. Parks Department, one of my favorite graphics in this report shows you the, oh gosh, now I've forgotten how many parks we have. 50, community centers. So it's the 50 community centers that the city currently owns. The bold ones in bold are the 12 that we actually operate. So we're currently we're doing an audit of the reuse program, but that's how deep the cuts were in Parks and Rec. One of the things I thought you'd be interested in on the left-hand side, you can see 56% of residents rated parks excellent or good. It actually feels like a pretty low number to me. And you can look at the trends in the report. Planning, building, and code enforcement, the permit center. Residents are back and forth into our permit center. 48,000 customers last year, 38,000 permits issued. One of the things that I keep saying is we need to make that convenient for them. Already, some people have to drive miles to get to City Hall just because of the distances in San Jose. So making them wait once they get here is not a great thing. So they're working hard on improving those wait times. We used to see lines stretching out, in the lobby of City Hall. Those lines have been cut way down at this point. You can see the timeliness of development services. So this isn't necessarily wait time at the center. So walk-in customers, they're hoping to have those in less than 30 minutes. Permits, building inspections, we're not hitting the targets of getting those done within 24 hours that we should. So again, I think part of that is you saw deep cuts earlier in the decade. There's staffing back up. It's a fee activity funded program. So I think part of it is allocated staffing, but another part is hiring. Microphone's back on. Police department, so 1.1 million calls for service. The average emergency call answering time was about 10 seconds. 13,000 arrests, that's about half what it was 10 years ago. We think part of that may be due to staffing, part of it may be due to law changes. You can see the map of the police districts and the number of responses in those districts. The upper right-hand corner is the average priority 1 police response time. So over the last 10 years, you can see they were pretty good in spite of all the cuts and reduced staffing at hitting their target, so keeping those response times below 6 minutes. They're now beginning to climb. So last year, the response time for a priority 1 call, so that's our top priority, was more than 8 minutes. And what you can see is what they were doing was, it's pretty obvious, protecting the priority 1 response time, so getting there fast when it's an emergency and responding less quickly when it's a priority 2 call. So you can see where those calls are now averaging 21 minutes. So that's an average. We do remove some of the extreme outliers, like if somebody forgot to turn off the machine or something. So sometimes we get outliers, we remove those. But that's an average, so that means a lot of calls are taking a lot more than 20 minutes. Another one on police, so crime is always a big deal to people. So you can see the resident survey, people are feeling less safe. You can see the police department down in the bottom right-hand corner. Respondents rating police services is excellent or good. I actually think, this is my interpretation, I think it was because we told them it was bad. So we kept telling people it's bad out there. And so people are listening to us. You can see when the chief started saying we've turned the corner, it's looking better, you can see a bump up over the last year. So I do think that's part of it. So part of it is just our messaging to the community. But part of it is also crime rates and everything else. So major violent property crimes. You can see where we were 10 years ago. We were far below where the dark blue line. We were pretty far below the state and national levels. Now we went up 1 year where there was a bump. There were changes in state law at that point. But then you can see that we're trending below, but we're no longer in that safest city category. Public works. One of the ones that people care a lot about is the bottom right-hand corner. So cats usually are not saved at the same rate as dogs are. So people don't tend to adopt cats at the same rate they adopt dogs. The animal shelter is very proud to see those statistics move. So now they've got cats up about where dogs were. That's the spay and neuter and return. I forget what they call that program. But that's the impact. They're having to euthanize a lot fewer cats. You can see the value of public works facilities, public improvements. So there's more information in the public works chapter Retirement Services is a department of the city. It is overseen by a retirement board. I just point this one out in part because it's in the book, but also the upper right-hand corner shows you one of the reasons why we're in a fix right now. Many years ago, you can see, so back in the 1980s? In the 1980s, we had five active employees for every one retiree. Now we've got more retirees than we have active employees. So there's fewer people contributing into the system, and we made some mistakes pretty clearly in earlier years by not contributing enough. One of the questions that I received was about how does the city intend to address the $4 billion unfunded liability for pensions and retiree health care? Well, this is part of it. So you see on the bottom right-hand corner the total annual contributions. What the city did was it amortized. So we're going to have budget issues for the next couple of decades while we pay off those past due amounts, that unfunded liability. The actuaries who actually compute what the city should contribute are giving us those numbers. So the city's contribution is up over 300 and some million at this point. It's about 28% of the general fund. Employees also contribute, so the total money flowing into the system to pay for current service credits being earned by employees today, as well as to pay off the unfunded liability. Last year, the total contributions in was about 400 million. Now, any pension plan expects to make money on its investments. That's why we pre-fund the pool, just like you do for retirement. So you put money into your retirement plan and you're hoping that it multiplies over the years. So that's why they tell you to contribute when you're young, because then it has time to grow. Well, the city had some good years and some bad years in there. We lost $1 billion during the economic recession. That's about what other pension plans of our size lost. So everybody lost money in the Great Recession. So the plan is that paying these kinds of amounts, we will pay off that debt in the next couple of decades. Now, it all depends. Stock market has to cooperate, bond markets have to cooperate, and the city has to keep, and employees have to keep contributing. But there is a plan in place to pay off those monies. But that is part of what's making our budget pretty difficult these days. Transportation, you heard a pitch for transportation funding. So our current pavement condition index, we track that over time. It's been drifting down. And that map is also on the DOT website, so the Department of Transportation website, where you can actually scroll in and see what the engineers say the condition of your street is. So you can go in and you can see it by color. So red is failed streets. So that means they basically need to be completely rebuilt. Poor is basically in that condition as well. So that's the discussion you heard earlier about if we spend money to keep good streets in condition, then they don't fall off into that category where it costs us like 5 times as much to actually have to go in and rebuild a street. The problem is it's pretty tough to see somebody else's street get slurry sealed, it's all nice and black and clean, while your street is full of potholes and actually crumbling. So that's kind of it for our report. There were a couple of other questions that I got by email, code enforcement. So the question was, is code enforcement expected to be cut this year? I don't know that. So given the improved budget position, I am hopeful that they won't be cut this year, but again, the city manager's proposed budget will be produced on May 1st, so you can see it there. I did want to point out that when you're looking at that budget document, what you're going to want to do probably is look at code enforcement staffing. So there's a page in the budget document for each department where it lays out the staffing. And I think we also look at code enforcement inspectors. So there's a couple of grades of inspectors and then supervising inspectors. Those are all the people who are out in the field actually doing the work. So I would keep an eye on those numbers, and you're going to be able to trace them back to our report to see what the staffing for code enforcement inspectors has been over the last 10 years. So you'll be able to see whether or not that's going up or down. Makes sense? So that's one way you can piece these two reports together. So this report here goes through fiscal year 16, 17, and then you can put it together with the budget when it comes out. The budget will have 16, 17 year numbers, and then it'll have 17, 18, and then proposed 18, 19. So that's where you want to look at the trends in staff, if that's something you care about. Look at, or you can apply this to any other department you care about. Hopefully you can look in our report and see the trend in staffing, and then you can pick up then how, so is 50 inspectors good or bad? You know, it's like, it depends kind of what it was last year, and what's the service level, what are our residents saying about code enforcement, are the ratings still dropping? You're going to have to put that information together, but that's why we appoint really bright people to our neighborhoods commission so that they can make comments on these kinds of things. I do not have information on code enforcement staffing compared to other cities. The problem we keep running into when we try to do those kinds of studies is that code enforcement can be very different in different cities. So it does become kind of a research project. If you want to look it up, I'd recommend you start the way we do, which is we'll pull up the budget from, say, the city of Santa Clara. We'll look and try and figure out where code enforcement is. Is it in the police department, the planning department? Do they have a separate department for it? You'll find this kind of thing with like animal services can be in any different department of a city. But pull up their budget document, and then we just get on the phone and start calling people. So that's how we find out. So what is, what's the function of your code enforcement department? Are you doing vehicle abatement in that department, or are you just doing, what are you doing? Where is graffiti? Is graffiti in that department? Is it a different department? So those are the kinds of things you're going to need to figure out in order to be able to compare. The other thing we sometimes do is just take a large number and just average number of code enforcement inspectors per dwelling, per 10,000 dwelling units, something like that, to equalize. So Santa Clara may have 10 code enforcement inspectors, San Jose has 50, but we've got 10 times the population that they do. So that was the code enforcement. There was a question about public safety funding. So there was an original target to reduce public safety by like 1%. I think that's gone away at this point, so I'm not expecting to see cuts in public safety. But again, I'll be looking at the budget document when it comes out to see where the cuts are and what's being funded. So sometimes they'll cut something, it's not a bad thing. They're moving the money to a different place that the chief feels would be better served. I was asked what kind of business process management system San Jose uses to manage its budget. I was joking with commissioners before the meeting that we have an old, for those of you who've been around computers for a few years, an old COBOL built program that there is nobody alive to fix. So it is band-aided and patched up. It's been in existence since I started with the city. So it was here in 1989 when I started with the city. It's been patched together. It has been upgraded. There's a Windows interface to make it a little easier. But please know, when you ask us for information, sometimes it's a real research project. Sometimes we're just being belligerent and don't want to answer your question. But most of the time, it is because it's a real research project. It's not like a modern system where you can just go in and double click on it and see how much you spent on travel last quarter. So that kind of answers that question. And then the final question was, what kind of data do we get when we're auditing? So to put together this report, I'll start there real briefly. We get copies of spreadsheets, copies of reports. It is hundreds of different places that we're getting this information. We compile it into some spreadsheets that we use to help paste this book together in Word and Excel. So there is no magic dashboard that'll show you the city's performance metrics. There aren't dashboards that can pull you, I mean, we're doing this stuff with Excel formulas. So we do require departments to provide us at least something to document what the response time was, but we're not auditing all the information back in the same way that we would say if we were auditing 911 response times, we would dive deep into the computer systems. For this purpose, what we're doing is we're pulling the information from their computer system so we can give you accurate information. We do it as an independent body, so we're independent from the city manager's office and all the departments. And the purpose is you've got auditors who are going out there to departments, deciding what will be included in the report, and then also, checking that the information is accurate, so it meets the sniff test. I'm so sorry, I think I went on a little long.
We wanted to make sure you had a...
Yeah, but I think that answers the questions that I was sent, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. There's a lot more detail in the report as well.
Thank you very, very much. So we are at about 10 to 8, and we can do a couple things. The only item we need to discuss in addition tonight is the budget and how we want to plan to get a budget letter to the city council by the next meeting, basically right after the next date, which is May 5th, I believe. So if we wanted to be succinct, we could go around and each person could ask a question, or we could, just the folks who are really interested can raise your paddle and ask a question. I think everyone does have a question. So why don't we go around and just be as succinct as possible. And Ms. Erickson, if you can take as much offline, we'd appreciate it. Commissioner Kendall.
Thank you for coming again. I know this is kind of a pain. I have a question about the fire department, police department retirement system. At what point will the funds that the city's putting in not be able to handle the amount of retirees or people on disability?
So I will try to answer that one very briefly. So the city is sitting on about so the two funds have about $5 billion in cash and investments. So we're not going to run out of money anytime soon. So the goal is to keep putting money into the system at a rate. Now, we're also depending on investment earnings, but the plan is to have sufficient funds. And that within, say, a 20-year time frame, they would be fully funded.
Thank you. I'm going to take notes on I'm not on Twitter as I type, so taking some notes as we talk. Commissioner Celestin.
Thank you. This is a wonderful report. I can say,
can you use your microphone?
Thank you for the report. I can't say I'm a little surprised, considering we live in Silicon Valley, the state of the data. I find that surprising, a little disappointing, that we can't seem to get our tech companies and our tech businesses to come help solve that problem.
So, in light of this, the population's still going to keep on growing, but it doesn't really lay out, just states what it grew last year. My concern is, on the fire station, we're already depleting our resources and all the calls that we're making. Is there enough budgeted money? Because I know we had allocated some money for an additional fire station to alleviate that problem. Is that money there? I know it went to the general fund. Would that be something that we could look into?
So very briefly, that's something I'd look in the capital budget. So the city's capital budget will be printed as well. I think it actually may come out before May 1st. But I would look for fire station, I think it's 37. Whichever number it is. But I would look for that in there. So that's the kind of thing where look to see what the budget numbers are doing. So are they going up? Are they building fire stations? Do they have a plan to staff? So that's a rebuild, but do they have a plan to staff? It's my understanding. Do they have a plan to staff those stations as well?
Commissioner Carter?
So, at one of the budget meetings with the mayor, he mentioned something about putting a reserve fund aside. And from your figures, you said that at one time we were $30 million short, and they're gonna have to make up $30 million. Now you're saying it's $7 million. So, have you heard anything about the mayor and what he's planning to put aside as a reserve fund?
Yeah, so he did have in his March budget message, there was a plan to do a reserve, and I'm not gonna try to quote it. But if you go on the city's budget webpage, where you can see the March mayor's budget message, you'll see that. So he did want to put some money aside, both in general reserves. I think we learned a good lesson during the flood emergency. So having some general reserves and then also reserves in case there's a budget deficit the following year. So again, that'll be in the proposed budget, but you could get a glimpse at it if you look at the mayor's budget message.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Velasquez?
Is there a plan for the community centers, especially not the hub ones, the reuse sites, to operate more, so that they have more ongoing program rather than just function as rental facilities?
So we are currently doing an audit of that right now, and we hope to issue that audit in the next several months. So yes, that is one of the things we're looking at. But that's also something you might want to look for in the budget. So again, community center staffing, is it going up or going down? What does the budget document say? So you can see that when you look at the budget document, each department has a chapter, and then with the number, they have additions and deletions, and you can see what they're adding. So something like that is going to be an addition of staff, so that's what I'd be looking for in the Parks and Recreation chapter.
Thank you.
Without having a lot of data on hand, we have an award-winning CIO, Ms. Santosh, I believe her name is, and so as we research this, and especially learning about the pulling things out of a Windows band-aided COBOL system, that just sounds really dangerous, honestly, if you're trying to run a city with $1 billion budget. I'm sure someone's noticed this internally, but I'll let you find out more about that. Thank you, and I'll be in touch. Commissioner Cunningham.
Following up on what you said, it's almost crazy that, for the size budget, and we keep advertising ourselves the 10th largest city in the United States, and we're operating like East Podunk. There are systems out there that have already been invented used by other city governments. They don't have to reinvent something. I mean, this is a serious issue. And thank you for your report. Based on the data that you get, and it's remarkable that you're able to get the results you do on your report. I'd like to acknowledge you for that.
We've got a great staff. Let me say that the FMS system is still supported by a vendor, which some of our data systems in the city are running out of their support. So it is in better shape than some systems around here. But it has been a long time concern of mine.
Commissioner Holstead.
No question.
Commissioner Young.
Yes, thank you. Under retirement services, I'm looking on page 120, and on the center right, there's total annual contributions for pension and retiree health and dental benefits. And from what I'm seeing here, the employer contributions have gone up significantly. The employee contributions have not. They're pretty flatlined. So my question is, does the city have a strategy to meet with the unions through a collective bargaining process to try and address that imbalance and maybe implement some cost sharing there?
So I wouldn't be able to speak with what the city is doing with the bargaining units. You can always track what they're doing. The Office of Employee Relations has a web page that's devoted to, they publish, so San Jose does publish, we sunshine all the proposals that are out there that are public. So you can look at those. I haven't looked at those to see whether or not that's covered. just very briefly, one reason for that is that current employees aren't necessarily the ones where we have the large unfunded liability. So the unfunded liability also applies to people who are already retired. So I think there is a concern about equity for people paying their fair share. What happens is if a retirement system, if everything works, everybody's contributing the right amount of money, it's making money and you have enough at the end of the day. Our problem is that it got off somewhere in the past. Those people may no longer work for the city. The city is responsible for picking up their share. So that's why you see the big difference there as the city has ramped up its payments so that it can pay down that unfunded liability. But I think in terms of the contribution share, good question. I think it would need to go to employee relations because I'm not involved at all in negotiations.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Martin?
Thank you for being here, I really appreciate it. It's one weekend. Awesome. You know, what's interesting is these things are really good because they show a couple of interesting trends. You know, one of them is that everybody in transportation is still out there driving alone, and public transportation isn't happening. You know, so we always blame people for what's going on. You know, that it's the city's fault, it's this person's fault, but realistically, it's us as a whole not doing our part also, and the statistics show that, and I think that's an important thing to be seen. You know, I will tell you, I'm really concerned about the potholes and all of that stuff and everything I'm hearing between Measure B funding and then potentially going out for another funding on that where we're supposed to already be doing that, and statistically showing that we're way behind. So, you know, this helps in that discussion for sure. Thank you very much.
No questions, just a boatload of work, thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us tonight. We really appreciate it. Ms. Erickson's available via her San Jose email address. We can work through Sabrina if we have questions, and we all may be in touch with you when we work on our budget letter.
Yes.
And we would ask respectfully that will be a priority among many other priorities that you have. But we would ask, we won't take your time lightly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, Commission Budget Letter. The purpose of this section is to ensure commissioners are preparing for the presentation for the city auditor. We've done that. And the action is to vote to hold a special meeting, if deemed necessary, to prepare the budget letter prior to the May Commission meeting. So to give some context, we are in, it's a little bit of a timing pinch. We sort of chicken and egg. The budget doesn't come out until the beginning of May. We need to have a public forum meeting in which we approve the final letter together, and the earliest we can do that is May 5th. We don't really have the data we need to actually write that letter tonight, or even have a draft of that letter tonight. So the proposal is that we assemble a special meeting. We would have a quorum of at least 11 people, and I believe, and please tell me if I'm wrong, Sabrina offered to put together a doodle for us. Did it? Okay. Sabrina offered to put together a doodle so that we could, in a coherent way, find a date that would work for everyone. It would be